Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining DataCon LA 2020. Welcome to the Data for Good track. So you'll be listening to Powering Location Data for Good session with Carissa Schroeder. I'm Courtney Fowler, your host, and our co-host today is Ed Choi. We'll be moderating the chat and Q&A for you during this session today. So if you have any questions, please feel free to enter them during this session. Again, today our guest is Carissa Schroeder, and her topic is Powering Location Data for Good. A short bio on Carissa. She's a product marketing manager for data and location service for ESRI. I guess it's RISI.
It's Esri.
Esri. Okay.
Yeah.
Carissa manages Esri's data and location services marketing. She holds an MBA in location analytics, and with over 10 years of marketing experience, Carissa is passionate in helping others to drive business intelligence with data. With further ado, I'll hand this over to our speaker. Thanks for being here, Carissa Schroeder.
Thanks, Courtney, and hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me on this Sunday here at DataCon. As Courtney shared, today I'm going to be sharing with you how to power location for good. And before we get started in showing some of these great examples, I wanted to really talk to you about why we use location data and how it can be used to look beyond the why and the what when problem solving. Location data is powerful, and it's something that I believe in, and actually helped me to shift my career in marketing to really represent something that I believe in that can help us to solve the world's problems as well as our local challenges. So location data is actually telling us beyond why and what, where, and how to act. And what's really interesting is that 80% of data actually has a location component. So all of the databases that you might have within your organization actually fundamentally already have location as a part of that experience. And what that means for us is that we can actually use location data as a common connection. So in your CRM or in your ERP or your database, you have that fundamental location. And when you want to seek out additional data to bring into your organization, you can utilize that location to connect them and to better understand the bigger picture by layering that data together. Now, when we do this, we can solve many problems, and they can, as I said, they can be global and they can be local. We look at location data as a way for us to have our connected cities and our connected world. We can solve problems such as hurricanes coming in and knowing how to act or knowing how to respond to those cases of emergency. As businesses, we can be more sustainable in our efforts, and we can understand how to deploy our resources so that they make sense in connecting to our customers, but also keeping our business on track and being able to prepare and respond to those events that might kind of shift and shelter the way we currently operate in our business. So one of the things that is really important for us to understand is that location changes. And before I really studied and got into analytics, I didn't realize like how often location changes and how important it is to keep our data up to date with the latest location, so that we're sure that we're comparing those apples to apples and not apples to oranges or maybe some other thing along the way. So we can look at the world and we can understand, the human behaviors and how people and the environment interact. And it really is about people and place and how we can look globally, but then we can also look locally and understand how these more smaller levels of geography, how people in particular areas react, how they think, how they plan, how they do. And so when we start to look at this, we can look at how population changes. And here I'm inviting you all to check out this website, go.esri.com/changing population. And what this is actually an article from Fast Company that looks at how the US has changed from 2010 to 2019. And I show this to you just to kind of bring that awareness of like how these populations are always changing and to help us to understand where are we changing throughout the US. But when we look at this, it really begs us to look in closer, right? And we need to understand more on the county level or even below that, how things are changing. So here we're looking at Denver, and we can see some very stark differences here between high levels of change and low levels of change. And as we start to look into further into zip codes, we can start to see exactly where those changes are taking place. And then we can start to make those decisions about why this is happening. What's really interesting is when you start to look at changing populations is that close neighborhoods actually have very stark changes. So we can look at a census tract here outside of Aurora, and we see that there's a 22% population increase in this area. But if we look at a neighboring census tract, there's only a 4% increase. And so by looking at this on the map, we can actually start to see what are the factors that could be contributing to this population change, and how can we go about maybe resolving the issues that are happening in an area where people are migrating out of and not migrating into. But what's really important here is to understand that looking at these changing boundaries is not always about migration. Sometimes it's about the actual zip code changing. And so this is why it's so important that we actually visualize our data and we don't just look at it in a tabular format. This changing boundary here is zip code 99780 actually was split in half this past year. So if we were not to be visually looking at this, we might think that a population change would be due to perhaps, migration or immigration, but if we really take a look, we see that it's actually been split in half. So understanding those changing boundaries is very fundamental to helping us to understand location. Because location is a science, and understanding the science, we have to really go about it in terms of scientific practice and developing theories and working through, problem solving to come to the best decision. Location data helps us to understand the likeliness of an event occurring in a particular area. And we can look at that in terms of the present, what is currently happening. But in order for us to really understand the future, we have to start to look at the data of the past and move that together with the data of the present so that we can be predictive in future occurrences and understand what is happening in the world around us. And when we do that, we really can empower these systems to help us to build a better world. And we can empower data to help us to do the good that we wish to do in the right areas for the right reason and the right purpose. So if we can imagine a world, right? Imagine a world where we're able to solve those problems and we're able to communicate out to our constituents how to solve those problems. We understand that no matter what industry we're working in, we're all working with limited resources. So if we're looking at resources in terms of natural resources, we have a limitation. If we're looking at economic resources within our organization, there's limitation. And with those limited resources, we need to have this precise knowledge of where and when to act so that we're not being wasteful. And we're able to deploy the resources where it makes the most sense to do so. And so we take what we call a spatial approach to this, and we problem solve with geography. And in doing so, we're able to start to formulate solutions for some of the key challenges of our time. Large challenges such as climate change or economic security, or even the things that are more on the local level. We can look at the homelessness population or housing affordability and try to understand how all of these things work together. With the change in climate and in the increase of fires, it also increases the amount of people that are suddenly displaced from their homes. So although we might not always think of these issues as being connected, they really are connected. And one of the best ways for us, again, to think about them is the connection of geography and how it influences these world issues. We'll talk a little bit more and share some more examples on, climate change, homelessness, public health. We'll talk about those, and I'll show some examples in a little bit. But before we do, I really want to talk to you about problem solving. And so we can understand how we've come to some of these solutions or some of these suggestions about how to recover. So the first thing we want to do when we want to solve a spatial problem is we want to ask a question, right? We want to develop that theory. And the theory is really telling us how we are going to explore more through geography, through location intelligence to determine the best way to act. And so when we're in the ask and explore stage, this is really where we're starting to think about what data do we need? What variables do we need to bring into our scientific practice to model and compute and then determine the answer? And so when we're in that ask and explore stage, some things we want to make sure we're doing is looking for authoritative data. We want to know that it's timely and refreshed data. And we want to know that the answers that come from the output of this data can be trusted. So in that ask and explore, you're starting to formulate the question, and you're pulling in the different data sets that can help you to solve that problem. Then we move into the model and compute stage, and you can model and compute location data in a variety of different ways. At Esri, of course, we always encourage people to use a GIS, or a geographic information system. And what that does is not only allow you to analyze the data visually, but it also allows you to collect data and to manage that data and to share it out with other people, all within your organization or to the people that matter most. So that is my recommendation, is to model that way, but we can also model in other ways, right? Some of us work in Power BI, or we work in Maps for Office, and we understand that we can visualize in that way to work within the limitations of what we have for software and to still be able to solve those problems. We also have things like notebooks, machine learning, AI. And so we are able to actually utilize those data sets to produce those outputs that will lead us into number 3, which is where we examine and interpret the information. And when we're in step 3 and we're interpreting what we found, what happens is actually sometimes we skip back to number 1, right? Because we're being very fluid. And we need to understand that sometimes getting the answer means going back and exploring more and more until we get it right. So if we go back to 1, 2, and 3, and then we interpret and we examine, suddenly we're at a spot where we can make a decision. And so we step to number 4. And when we're making that decision, it's really about us understanding like what is the best outcome for the question that we've asked in the beginning. And when we understand the best outcome, that's when we move into sharing those results. And there's a variety of ways you can share the results. Today, I'm going to share with you a hub, ArcGIS hub, which again helps you to tell a story. And also a story map, another way that we recommend telling stories. But you can take that information, you can turn it into an infographic, you can share just out a map, you can build it into a report or even a PowerPoint like I'm sharing you today. But the key is making your decision, solving that spatial problem, and to be able to share it out with others so that they can help you and work with you to solve the problem. Now, as we talk about data, there's a variety of different types of data that can come in, and the power really is layering this different data together to develop information. And so I'm going to kind of run through these very quickly, and then we'll move on to some examples for you. The first type of location data is boundaries. And when we think about boundaries, it really doesn't have to be a national boundary or zip code boundary. It can also be the boundaries that are created naturally in our world. So here we see sea boundaries, or we might see the mountain boundaries and the valleys and the different ways the geography shapes our world, in addition to those more governmental boundaries that we're likely more familiar with. And again, as we talked about earlier, these boundaries are always changing. And inside those boundaries are demographics. And so these are our people, there are populations, and understanding their education or their income, and really looking at the world and understanding the differences that make us unique as people of these very fundamental demographics. Now, what's really powerful is when we start to look at demographics alongside behavioral data. And behavioral data can help us to understand, who people are in a unique area and what their behaviors are. Tapestry segmentation is something that Esri has created that separates the US into 67 different neighborhoods. And these neighborhoods you would think that they're all very unique to where you're located in the US. So you might think, okay, someone in the Northeast is very different than someone in the Southwest. But what actually happens is you get these different pockets around rural areas or urban areas that have very like-minded and similar attributes about them. And so We can see this, we can use tapestry segmentation to understand, how people react. And I think one of the best ways I've seen this used is reacting to see how people might react to a time of crisis. And so if we know that someone they're behaviorally not likely to leave in a time of maybe a hurricane, we know we might need to send out some extra people to help assist them and to get them along to safety. So tapestry segmentation is one example of behavior, as well as consumer spending. We can understand how people spend money, how likely they are to contribute to a nonprofit organization, how likely they are to purchase the internet and be able to participate with the rest of us. Same thing with market potential. What's our likeliness to reach someone? Now, movement data is one of those really interesting data sets that's emerging. It's understanding how people travel from point A to point B, and then how to reach them along that way. What are their behaviors along that way? We have places data that helps us to understand those locations and understand them in detail. Places here we're seeing over imagery, and it's really helping us to make sense of a neighborhood and how people interact with those neighborhoods. And I'll show a really good example of this in just a minute about how Santa Monica is using this for COVID-19. We also have imagery data that can help us take that bird's eye view of a location and better understand, the actual footage of the area and any opportunities we have to better that area. Here we have the University of Redlands, my alma mater, and we do see, lots of parking along here. These are ways where we can find, maybe there's an opportunity for a bike path here, and we can study the traffic, and we really can find that way to take action while actually looking at the actual land on the ground and discovering those opportunities. The environment, of course, is an integral piece of understanding how to deploy location data for good. We of course are in this time right now with climate change happening, wildfire happening, and understanding how the environment affects us as humans is integral to us, to bettering our space and bettering our communities. So we can look at the water and the weather, historic weather, understanding, what are the opportunities for us going forward into increase our land cover, increase our tree cover, what are our protected species, all of these things, they all come together and they help us to better understand the geography and the landscape and also how humans interact with them. And we can also look at this from a live feed example. So live feeds are data that are coming in, they're a constant stream of data, and they help us to understand immediately when to act. So in this case, where we're looking at a hurricane coming in about to make landfall, a live feed can help us to understand where that landfall will take place. And then if we add in additional data, such as the movement data, we can start to analyze, where are people traveling to, what is the safest destination for them to go, and how can we get people to safety. And so with all of that, it really is just about taking action. And so what I'm going to do now is actually jump on over to my browser and take you through some of the experiences that we've created for you in a variety of different topics. And I'm starting here with COVID-19. This here is a hub, and what this hub does is it brings in a variety of information, and it allows us to really tell a story to anyone who will listen about different resources. We've brought in different data, apps, learning solutions, also news highlights, so that people can stay informed about one of the key issues that matters most to them right now. And what's really great about this hub is that we actually host a global map gallery, and we've had a variety of people come in and actually bring in their maps to share out with the rest of the world. As we know, all of our communities are facing the battle with COVID-19. And so when you get these communities together, sharing these authoritative information sources, we really have this opportunity to learn from each other and to build off the other opportunities that other people have realized and they want to share out so that we can learn from them together. One of these maps is this dashboard created from Johns Hopkins University. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with this map. It's one of those maps that we joke has won around the world because it has been instrumental in keeping the world informed of what is happening globally with the COVID-19 pandemic. And we're able to look at it from a global view, but we can also zoom in and look at our very specific neighborhoods and understand, how are things happening within the places where we live, and how are they happening within our neighboring communities as well. So as you see right here in this box that we're showing, we're looking at San Diego right now and see that there's been over 54,000 cases in San Diego. But if we look closer to Los Angeles, we can see that it's actually closer almost now to 300,000 cases. And so we have these two, large communities that are actually seeing different results for what's happening with the pandemic. And so this can help us to study what is working and what is not, right? So this dashboard really helps us to start to formulate those questions and again, to continue to think about what are other ways that we can go about solving this. Now, what's really great about location data is that it's not just a science, it's also a creative outlet that allows us to really explore and interpret the data in a way that makes sense for us. So as we see the dashboard here from Johns Hopkins University being communicated in one way, as we move over to what we have here, it's called a COVID pulse map. So it's pulling in the same data from Johns Hopkins University, but it starts to look at the US in terms of a heartbeat to give us a clear understanding of how we're doing nationwide. And what this does is pulling in weekly data, and we can see how different states are doing in terms of their response and any areas where in case they might be increasing. So we do see California had a big spike in increase here, but we're actually on the downward slope. But we can start to see areas in the Midwest, such as my home state and Wisconsin, that is really, the cases are actually really starting to pick up. And so where we've had low amounts of cases in the past, suddenly it's really made a far jump. And we can look at the new cases per capita, the deaths per capita, and the cumulative cases. And if we actually get further into the map and we start to look at a certain area, and we go down to the county level here, we'll head back over to California with LA DataCon. And we can start to look more specifically at the county level and start to understand if we're in an emergent, spreading epidemic, if we're controlled in the end stage, or if there's no cases. And so this is actually really helpful for us to, again, look at the different counties, see how we're doing overall in comparison with others. You can see in Ventura, we're in an epidemic trend. In Los Angeles, we're in an epidemic trend. But what I thought was interesting here is actually in Santa Barbara, it's in a spreading trend. So it hasn't exactly hit that epidemic yet, but it is in the spreading. So even within, close drives, close neighborhoods, we are seeing some big changes, and this dashboard can help us to analyze that. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Santa Monica actually built a web app that people can access to understand what businesses are open. And this, again, we're not looking at the cases of COVID-19 in this case, but we're looking at how can we respond through our local neighborhoods, how can our businesses respond in this time of crisis. And so there's different ways we can analyze data along the same topic, but we're analyzing the data in a way that makes sense for its question and its use case. And the question here is, what's open? And what time are they open? And what services do they provide? And so we're actually able then to come in and edit this. Should someone suddenly say, you know what, we're not open 9 to 5 anymore. We're actually going to be open 9 to 2:30 to be better adjusted to our customers' needs. That this is Santa Monica's way of communicating that out to its community so that shoppers can still shop, business owners can still have their businesses, and we can fight to survive through this pandemic together. Another example of a question that is being asked by those involved with the COVID-19 response is, how many households have internet access? And I find this to be so incredibly interesting. Personally, I find this interesting. As we start to think about this virtual world and this virtual space that we're all a part of right now, if we do not have access to internet, we cannot work from home. We cannot have our children have their education from home in their virtual classrooms. So when we look at the U.S., we actually see that it's a larger problem than we might have really ever imagined. When you see it on the map, you can really see where those opportunities are for us to act and for us to perhaps solve these problems. And I know one of the first things when I viewed this map, if I go back to that spatial thinking, when I viewed this map, the first thing I wanted to do was add on, that education. Where are the children in K through 12, and where are they located, and how many of them actually don't have access to internet? So when we see something like this, if we see a map like this, again, it's going to drive us to ask more questions. And as we ask more questions, we're going to find more solutions, right? And oftentimes the better solution about how to take those actions through location data. So you might be asking yourself, and you might be thinking, okay, this is great. We've covered COVID-19. We know that if we come over to the hub, we'll be able to find all of these in our global map gallery. But what about other questions we might be having? So what we have here is called ArcGIS Living Atlas of the World. And just to shorten that up, if you just look up Living Atlas in your search engine, you'll be able to find this as well. And what Living Atlas does is it actually brings together geographic resources for us of maps, apps, and data layers that can be used to support our work. And what we do is we go into the browse and we can search for a variety of different topics that can help us to get started in mapping and analysis, as well as data science. And we can look at things such as recent earthquakes, or maybe we're looking at current wildfires, and we can really start to understand this information and build off of authoritative resources. So what makes Living Atlas great is that it's always being updated, and it's made of a series of contributors. And so you'll find contributors in here such as NOAA and NASA, as well as local conservancies, NatureServe. It has wonderful biodiversity maps in here. So you'll find a variety of resources that can help to support your work and to help you get started. Additionally, you'll find apps and story maps, and I'll share a few of those with you. But as you scroll around and you learn about Living Atlas of the World, you can actually click on apps and get introduced to them as well. So here's what we call a story map. And story map is a way for us to communicate this information in a way that really tells a story for our users. And so we're going to bring in visuals and text and even maps so that people can understand and know how to intervene on the matter that we're trying to communicate. Here's the coastal flooding example. It's from NOAA, as well as Old Dominion University and Esri, and it was developed in June of this year, looking at Norfolk, Virginia. And what they hope to do with this is to communicate what will be happening when sea level rise, if it does continue to occur. What we start to see, and I'll bring you down to this really great map of Norfolk, Virginia. They've brought imagery into this, and what they've actually done is layered on flood inundation data, which has a 3-foot sea level rise. So they're looking at, if a 3-foot sea level rise happens, how will it affect the coastal line? And so we can look at it as it is currently, and we can start to see areas of highlighted in green, which might be under some risk at our current state. But if it were to continue with the 3-foot sea level rise, what would it look like over time? And so that's the question we're really demonstrating here in the story map. Here we see in 2040, we start to see areas of red, and those areas of red represent high risk. Areas of orange, they impact, they're more moderate risk, and then yellow is even less of a risk here for us. But as we start to look at it, we can start to see the downtown tunnel area down here by Portsmouth. We can see this downtown tunnel area, it's under threat, and we can understand that this is an area where we may need to deploy resources in the near future should sea level continue to rise. Now, as we look at 2060, we start to see that increase in red. And as we go all the way up to 2080, it actually demonstrates that threat very well for us. And we start to see that, wow, a large portion of Norfolk will actually be underwater in a near time. So knowing that this is ahead of us, it helps us to deploy the right resources so that we again know how to make the best decisions and how to react to this pending situation. So globally, we're all thinking globally, right? And we're all trying to understand what's happening across the world for a variety of different things. And here we have ArcGIS indicators of the planet, again, that can be found within the Living Atlas. And this shows us how we're doing on a global heartbeat, on a global scale, on a variety of issues. So I'm trying to move here, Courtney, here we go. So you guys can see this whole dashboard. So we have the COVID-19 cases, and we can look at the cumulative cases in the last 24 hours. We can look at the number of earthquakes we've had this week. We've had a 6.4 magnitude earthquake. We can look at the number of armed conflicts this week. That's actually increased in the past week by 2,600 events. We really can look at this and get that like global eye view of how we're doing on these sustainable development goals or SDG goals, and understand where these opportunities are for us to react globally, and where truly we are based on this authoritative data, not just based on what someone might be telling us. Some of these items here, such as wildfire and air quality, hit very close to home for us. And when we start to look at how we're doing globally, of course, it encourages us to think about, okay, well, how are we doing locally? And again, so looking at how we're doing locally, we can start to think about, okay, again, we talked about sea ice, we talk about rising water. This application called Sea Ice Aware can help us to really analyze from, how are we doing? From 1979, we have this large sea ice extent, but as we start to look over time, how it might change. So let's say we look at 2016, we can start to see these changes and how the sea ice has changed over time so that we can understand the different flooding that's affecting us. So again, at its lowest extent, here's in 1979 in September. If we were to compare that to how it's doing now, here's 2012, you start to see that drastic change. The good thing is that it does fluctuate over time. And so sometimes you'll see more. More recently in 2019, we're seeing a bit less. So again, it's helping us to track that change, helping us to track the action that we can do. And we can look at it from the Arctic and also the Antarctic to see, again, what effects does this have, what changes are occurring. Now, coming back to the wildfire example, this app was created to communicate out what wildfires are happening within our neighborhood. So we can come in, we can click on here and see here example of the glass fire. The glass fire had over 67,000 acres burned, and now it's 97% contained. We can see the news stories around it, the Twitter and the Facebook, and understand, how is the social communities been responding to these acts of the earth, right? The acts of the fire. And we can start to look at, in Los Angeles, that this fire here was 115,000 acres. And we can look at it over time and understand, how is this affecting us as a state and as a Southwest? How is this affecting us? And then it begs us to ask, how does it affect our air quality? And how does air quality change? So in different areas, we're going to see where air quality is better or worse. And we know that this can change on a daily basis. And so bringing in air quality data from these authoritative sources, such as the EPA, NOAA, census, it starts to help us to understand, the people in these areas and the environment, and how we need to react to keep our people safe. And so here we're looking at not only just, the current forecast, but we're also looking at the wind speed to understand how will the wind carry that air quality and the populations that are at risk, and how we can go about helping and servicing those at-risk populations. Now I want to introduce you all to one more app, and it's called Maps for Public Policy. And here you can come in and really click around and find maps that are ready to use, free to share, and you're able to actually embed them in your work. So if you want to tell a story on mental health, on homelessness, there's also the economic opportunities, the environment and natural resources. What you're able to do is actually click in. It'll provide a variety of results for you to actually view on this map, and then you can go ahead and share. And so I've actually populated a few of them for us. This first one is the drive time to VA medical facilities. And I find this to be a very important topic for us all to consider, is how long it takes someone to get to a veterans clinic. What's good to see is in Los Angeles, it's really, we're doing quite well, I would say. So it might take someone 31 minutes to get to a facility here around Long Beach, around Los Angeles, and we can really analyze the different areas and see how long it's taking people. But as we start to get up to a little bit northern parts, we start to see where it's becoming, more red. So it might take over 90 minutes to get to a VA clinic. So this, again, giving us the opportunity to not only just look at our local environment, but also the US and trying to understand how we can do better in the US. And then here's an example of homeless point and count. And so we can also then look at, okay, how is LA doing versus San Diego or Las Vegas? And it really clearly provides us the information to intervene and the option to act on these big environmental and also population, these big crises that are facing us. And so if you're interested, you can always copy and share this. You can always click on Twitter and share it out as well. If you were to email this, it would actually populate this map right in your email for someone. So I encourage you all to check out Maps for Public Policy from Esri. Again, they're free maps and they're there for you to share out with your constituents and help you to support these efforts that you're doing in a way that you can visualize and provide those facts. So in closing, I want to come back to this current slide and just remind you that today we talked about location data and how we can take action, how to go beyond why and what, and how to understand where and when, so that we can deploy our resources in the best way that they make sense. Now, if you're interested in learning more about location data, I invite you all to go to esri.com/data, and there you'll learn about all the data sets that I shared with you today. I'm also interested in connecting with you. I think it's important at these types of events that we do make those connections. And although I wish I could be meeting with you all face to face today and shaking your hands, I'm so happy that you decided to join me. And I would love to continue those conversations. So please reach out via LinkedIn. I'm happy to come in and talk to your students. I'm happy to have those one-on-one coffee chats. And I really do believe that location data is one of those things that we all need to share and we all need to care about so that we can, of course, do good and better our world. So with that, I want to thank you all for joining me. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen here so that in case there was any questions, I'll be able to answer them.
Well, let me check the chat and the session Q&A.
Okay.
Ed, did you see any questions come during the session that might be able to be filled in the remaining 2 minutes we have left?
Yeah, I don't see any Q&A on the app, so I think we're good right now.
No, I didn't see any either. So this means one of two things. Either we were on our Sunday blues or you had a very thorough presentation, which I find enlightening as far as like how much power we have our location data, right? So I definitely appreciate your time and your effort for that. And I'm pretty sure all the attendees do as well, even though they've been kind of silent.
Well, I appreciate everyone tuning in. And if there are questions, please reach out and I'd be happy to answer them. And thank you, Courtney, and thank you, Ed, for having me today.
Of course. Well, I guess in closing, thank you again, Carissa, for your presentation, and I appreciate all the attendees for your time and attention during this session. If you have any questions, again, I think Chris had mentioned, please contact for any further questions or any resources that she had kind of during this presentation. Also, please write your comment and feedback to our organizers on this community board or start a discussion to connect with others in DataCon LA 2020 community. Again, thank you for joining us today's presentation, and I hope you can gain some insights from this session. Again, have a wonderful day, and thank you for being part of this year's DataCon LA. All right.
Thank you. Bye.
Mm-hmm.